Namaskar and welcome to this special program. I'm Vipul Mudgal and today we are talking about rural broadcasting in India. And my guest in the studio is Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan, who's a former ICT Assistant Director General of UNESCO and a former Vice Chancellor of Indira Gandhi National Open University. Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan is also a world-renowned educator, communication specialist. He's an author and he's also a development thinker in his own right. So we want to know from Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan to begin with, sir, what is the future of radio in India? Do you think that radio in the age of television has taken a backseat?
Well, radio certainly is not as important as it used to be, simply because television, people who have television tend to prefer television to radio. But for a large segment of the rural population, radio is still a very, very important medium. Not only because many farm families still cannot afford a television set, but also because radio remains a very portable means of communication and it doesn't necessarily require your total attention as television does, that you cannot do things as you are watching television, whereas you can drive and listen to radio, you can be working in an agriculture field and listening to radio, you can work on a construction site and listen to radio. So I think radio has certain features. In terms of technology, it's also a lot more portable, lot more rugged, and no question that it is much more cost effective in terms of...
One sees very often, sir, that a farmer is going on a bicycle and there is a radio playing. Which is such a happy scene in Indian villages.
Well, I have pictures of farmers plowing the field and a transistor hanging in the plow. So, you know, there are all kinds of, but I'm sure that's a very rare. But people grazing the buffalo and listening to a radio, this is not unusual. I mean, people doing all kinds of things and carrying a radio with them, it's a common sight.
So there's a famous number, it's a Hollywood kind of number, not exactly from the films, but made famous by a group called Buggles. And it says, video killed the radio star. We hit him with an old guitar or something like that. Basically tried to run away but didn't go far. Basically saying that the radio is dead or radio is going to be dead. What is your view on that?
I don't think radio will be dead. Radio may take a different form. I mean, as the technology develops, for example, nothing prevents from the radio and telephone, mobile telephones being one device. You know, I mean, it's a very small device. It's portable. You use it as a telephone. You use it as a radio. You use it as a tool for text messages, etc. So it's one platform with different, the audio, video, and data together in one device. So things will change, and as they should, as the technology progresses, we ought to adopt to new forms of receiving, seeking, and transmitting information.
Which means the technology is further going to change the landscape of all this. I mean, it's also a platform, mobile phone, on which you have television, you have radio, you also have all kinds of things. But say something about shortwave radio. Now, shortwave radio cannot be heard on a mobile phone. And shortwave radio used to be quite a big thing in the Second World War. Now, that has changed. From medium wave, we have the FM radio. Now, in the villages, we have seen that people do listen to radio a lot more than television, but television is still an aspirational thing. Everybody wants to have a television.
Sure, that there is no denying. Also, I mean, as a medium of communication, it appeals to this, the visual sense as well as audio. Therefore, I mean, it is certainly things that are presented on television, people are likely to understand and assimilate and accept and adopt more easily than something. I mean, radio is ephemeral. It comes, it's broadcast. If you don't catch it right there, it's gone.
So there was this recently there was a hurricane in the US called Sandy, and millions of people were left without power. And obviously the television sets were not working, the satellite dishes were not working, satellites went on a blink. So suddenly there was obviously some revival of radio.
Yeah.
But do you think in the Western countries radio is still doing well?
Well, people, I mean, for example, listening to radio as you are driving is a common phenomenon. Just about every single car has a built-in radio. So, I mean, as a radio as a medium is very much still alive.
Sort of late chat radio has become very popular. And people are talking, discussing politics, trade union. There's public radio in which the urban issues, traffic, everything is being discussed. Do you think this is coming to India in some
way? Well, it had to happen because the technology now allows more interactivity. Phone-in radios, for example, it's a common phenomena, and people want to participate. You see, one thing about radio is that it gives people their own voice, and at a very, very low cost. And that's why, if radio still has a future and will continue to be a useful device for people to use, it's because it is so portable and so cost effective. That it is not going to, frankly, with so many advances in technology, it has survived. People used to say newspapers will disappear because now there are television. What has happened? Look at the print media proliferation in this country, the revolution in print media, with more television, more radio, more mobile telephone, and there is more print media. So
there is definitely
they tend to, supplement, complement, and support each other.
In fact, in some languages, the explosion of Indian newspapers is in more than 100%. In Assamese language, in Gujarati language, in Odia language, it goes up to something like 600%.
Yeah.
So the newspapers have grown.
Yeah.
The television has also definitely grown.
Sure.
The number of channels has gone up. But do you think there is a qualitative difference between rural broadcasting and urban broadcasting?
Well, I mean, the main difference is the kind of programming that you plan, design, produce, and transmit for rural audiences would be somewhat different than for the urban audiences. Simply the relevance of the information. The two populations don't necessarily need or the same kind of information. News, for example, is a common. Urban and rural audiences share that interest. Entertainment, listening to music, they share that interest. But when it comes to specific messages that have to do with awareness, that is knowledge, change in people's attitudes, change in behavioral practices, etc., certainly the urban broadcasting and rural broadcasting tends to be different, because you have to pitch to their interest.
Okay, sure. But this also brings us to the next question. Today's farmer is a lot more vulnerable than yesterday's farmer, in the sense that he is more input oriented. The agriculture demands more money, more inputs in the form of whatever goes into producing a good crop. So now we have been seeing that the farmer is vulnerable in terms of, say, weather, in terms of his dependence on good markets. Very often he does not get a good rate only because he did not know that he could get better rate in a mandi or some other. Since you mentioned the mobile services and radio going together hand in hand, particularly in agricultural communication. So do you think in this particular area this technology can help him, or do we need to do something in such a way that we actually make it a tool for the farmer, it works for the farmer?
Well, I think it can serve a very useful purpose for the farmers, because we know that many of the products produced at the farms are of perishable nature. The farmers need to find out which market to take it to, what prices are there, where will the farmer get more remunerative prices for his produce and services, etc. So I think today the mobile telephone can be a very, very useful device, and I mean, it is one of those technologies that were waiting to happen, and fortunately the technology does exist. People in rural areas, first time that I am able to, no matter where I have lived in recent years, I have been able to be in contact with my village, with my family members, etc., living in the village. So it is, I mean, I'm not talking of just social relationships.
Dr. Khan, India has a huge coastal community. It's a country which, you know, two sides we have, you know, vast oceans. Now, the fisherman in India is also a farmer. He's also farming, fishing in a certain way. And very often we say when the disasters struck or have struck in the past, we have seen that the fishermen who have already been inside the ocean for weeks, sometimes for days, have no way of communication. They can't be told that, look, there's a storm warning or there's anything like that. And we saw that during the tsunami, which hit India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Thailand, many other countries, you know. So do you think the radio once again has a big role? Is anything being done in that area right now?
Well, I think in a way, frankly, you have answered the question. If a fisherman is deep in the ocean, has no contact with the land, has no television set, has no other source of information, he is still carrying a radio or a mobile phone, can get this information in fraction of a second and use that information for his personal security, for the security of his co-workers in the boat, you know, the fishing boat that they are on. So it is, again, going back to your first question, whether radio is still relevant. Yes, indeed it is relevant. And not only today, even during my days in radio, coastal Andhra Pradesh, for example, the cyclone is very common phenomena. And broadcast information on time saves not only lives, but livestocks. The crops are saved, to an extent. As you know, to the extent that you can take precautionary measures and so on and so forth. So yes, it can be a very important device for personal safety and security. It can be certainly a very important tool for getting information about market rates, about new products that may have been introduced for either the protection of crop from insects and diseases and pests and so on and so forth.
So this is very interesting. So I want a brief reaction from you about how it has been over the ages. You know, during the Second World War, we saw very clearly that the ham radio had become very popular and people, they were like private operators all over the place. Now, how has it been through the independence movement till today? You think radio has changed or it has not changed enough? Or what is your view?
Radio has certainly changed. There has been, revolution in radio, as in, of course, in other technologies as well. But I mean, look at this small handheld device that I mentioned earlier, a mobile telephone, is now a source of information with sound, with text, and now more and more video. So it is, just imagine how the technology, we used to talk about television and radio and print media. Now you hold one small device in your hand and it is print, it brings whatever used to be brought to you through print media, through medium of radio and through medium of television.
So has it had a great role in India's nation building? Do you think during, say, great years of Green Revolution or family planning, it played a decisive role?
Well, it certainly, in my view, it has in Green Revolution, it is often talked about in that when new Tai Ching Native 1 variety of paddy was introduced, many farmers in Tanjore district called it radio rice. You know, a good example of how closely radio was associated in sharing information and knowledge about new agriculture when the Green Revolution had just begun in this country. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that radio played the most important role, certainly not, but radio did play an important role, and fortunately at that time there was a very good project of farmers training, functional literacy and farm broadcasting. That was 3 ministries were involved: Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Human Resources and the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And this was a UNDP funded project. And I was very fortunate to be part of that project. It is under that project that farm broadcasting in India developed very rapidly.
So that was the time when we had a lot to tell them. But was that also the time when we needed to hear from them? Was it a two-way communication?
Absolutely, it was. It was never entirely two-way communication. One has to be honest about it, because again the mindset of the broadcaster was that the best programs are produced in the studio. Now I question that assumption really, because communication is when you bring reality, you bring credibility, you bring a context into the program. And I was constantly pleading for more and more programs to be produced with the microphone going out and reaching out to people, rather than Dr. So-and-so and scientist so-and-so coming to the studio and broadcasting a program in a very technical language with all kinds of technical terms and measurements, etc., which farmers had difficulty understanding, frankly.
But I mean, today you don't have to take the microphone, you have the mobile phone now.
There you are. That's that you are able to get the feedback from the farmers. You are able to collect. I mean, citizens' media has become a reality today. Now, one thought about many years ago, why can't people produce their own program? There was a time when I was working in Bangladesh, and I said, why can't we give small cassette recorders to people that we train, let them go in the rural areas and record programs that they consider most useful for those audiences. And these things you have to think out of the box, because as long as you are constantly thinking with a mindset that this is the only way in that box that you can.
Definitely. You bring us to another very interesting, very important question, that is of community radio. Now, all over the world, community radio is exploding. In India, I think we have some fears. We feel that being a secular country, multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, we have some anxieties here. Do you think the community radio has a future in India?
I certainly believe it does. I mean, it took a long time for India to accept the idea of community radio. Since it has already begun, and when you consider the size of the country and its vast population, it's certainly 110 or 120 community radio stations cannot serve a country as vast as India is. But once it has been accepted as a policy, I think it will happen. More and more community radios, but some people think that a community radio must have only these features. Community radio will take different forms and shapes. Universities are in this space, the Krishi Vigyan Kendras are in this space, the agriculture universities, and of course those NGOs that run and operate community radios. So there will be some variations, but nonetheless, I think, and when you also look at the advances in communication information technologies, it's bound to happen. It's bound to change.
Every region has a different experience. They have different patterns of cropping. They have different water levels. They have different. So, are you a supporter of localization of radio?
Absolutely. I have been a very strong advocate since my days in All India Radio in mid-70s, and in fact I prepared a major project for localization of radio when I was part of All India Radio.
So what is the best way of doing it?
Well, for development, I'm convinced, whether it's agriculture, animal husbandry, sericulture, horticulture, health practices, education, people want to hear the information in their own local dialect, in the idiom that they are familiar with, etc., etc. So it's the same thing for rural audiences, that if you broadcast in the local dialect, reflect the local reality, broadcast information on topics which are of relevance, which people can make use of, etc., information that people can make use of, they will listen to the program.
So, rural broadcasting is connected to development communication in that sense?
Absolutely. It is. It has been a major part of development communication everywhere in the world, all over the world. You know, community radio, or you call it rural broadcasting or farm broadcasting. The people have given different names for basically the process of sharing information and knowledge, obtaining people's involvement and participation in the communication process. That is essentially the...
So, you come from village yourself, and you still continue your connection with the village. You keep visiting your village in Uttar Pradesh in India, which is in a very remote part of Uttar Pradesh in India. Now, is it fair, is it a fair charge to make that the radio is no longer a medium of young people, it is a medium of only old people? What are your views on that?
Well, I think younger people tend to use the mobile telephones, a device which gives them the three elements, the video element, the text and audio. You still find in the evening people listening to radio for entertainment purposes. It does not distinguish whether they are young or old in the family. It's still a family time when they play, something is playing and people in the family
particularly a local sense. So, which means the mobile phone has brought the young people back into radio. That's a good news.
Certainly.
So, my last question to you is about the future of public service broadcasting. Now, we see that there are private channels. Private channels talk about issues which are connected with consumerism, with the market, with the forces that will probably give more advertisement for the people who have deeper pockets and all the rest that goes with it. Now, what is the future of public service broadcasting where we can still continue broadcasting for the welfare of people? What do you think of the BBC model, which apparently is also shrinking?
Well, that is a very, very pertinent question and a very, very important question. I believe, I'm sometimes disturbed to see that the bars have been constantly lowered in order to attract more audiences, for the rating purposes, because that's dumbing down of the population, etc., etc. I believe public service broadcaster has the responsibility not only to promote and support the local culture and provide information which is perceived to be useful for the population. In our own country, we have, of course, All India Radio and Doordarshan as public broadcasters. It is true all over the world, the support for the public service broadcasting is declining in terms of resources, but in terms of relevance, I really believe that how long can you continue with every news becoming a breaking news? And therefore, in my view, I'm a casual observer. When I come here, I watch this and I am appalled, I have to say, I'm not saying that all private broadcasters are irresponsible. Some excellent programs are also broadcast on private channels. But public service broadcaster has the responsibility to promote the local culture, to promote the development ideology of the society, to create harmony in the society. I suppose that is a function that private sector broadcasters probably would not engage in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan. We've also learned quite a lot, and we've also seen in this freewheeling discussion with you how things are connected with each other, how to connect the dots between rural communication, between rural broadcasting, and things like welfare state and development communication, and how to make a difference and how to bring about a social change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation very much.